Marcus slowly pushed himself onto his elbows, eyes scanning the lonely street. The ambush had been swift and brutal. Nero's men knew exactly where they would be and had set the trap perfectly. Marcus's mind raced, deciphering how it had all gone wrong. The mole. There had to be a mole. Someone within the resistance had fed Nero's forces the exact location of the decoy group. It was the only explanation. But Marcus couldn't dwell on that now. Not when every second he stayed here increased his chances of being discovered. He had to move, find shelter, and survive. He forced himself to his feet, wincing as the pain in his side flared. The alleyway offered little cover, and the street beyond was eerily empty. There were no signs of Nero's men, no sounds of approaching footsteps, but Marcus knew better than to trust the quiet. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a lifeline in the chaos. He pulled it out, his heart beating when he saw Leah's name flash across the screen. She hadn't listened. Of course, she hadn't. Leah wasn't the type to abandon someone she cared about, no matter how dangerous the situation. Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. Leah. Where are you? Her voice was strained, laced with worry. I'm close. I'm coming to get you. No, Marcus said quickly, his eyes darting around the alley. You need to get out of here. It's not safe. I'm not leaving you, Leah replied, her tone fierce. Tell me where you are. Marcus let out a frustrated breath. He knew there was no convincing her to turn back, no way to make her see the danger she was walking into. Leah was stubborn and relentless, and when she made up her mind, there was no change. I'm near the market district, Marcus said, his voice low. But you shouldn't come here. Nero's men. I don't care about Nero's men, Leah cut him off, her voice firm. Just stay where you are. I'll be there soon. The line went dead, leaving Marcus standing alone in silence again. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, a mix of frustration and fear tightening his chest. Leah was coming for him, and that terrified him more than anything. He couldn't let her get caught up in this. He couldn't let her risk everything for him. But deep down, Marcus knew that Leah would never abandon him. It wasn't in her nature. She had chosen her path long ago, and now, she was pulling him along with her, whether he liked it or not. Leah Gregorio moved quickly through the winding streets of Rome, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been one to hesitate in the face of danger, but the stakes had never been this high before. Not for Marcus. Not for someone she had come to care about more than she was willing to admit. The decoy plan had been a disaster. They had underestimated Nero's reach and his ability to infiltrate their ranks. Leah had known the risks and accepted them as part of the fight, but this was different. Marcus was different. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't built for this life of constant running, hiding, fighting. And yet, he had stayed for her. She couldn't let him die because of it. Her phone buzzed again, and another message came from Peter. She ignored it. There would be consequences for this, there always were, but Leah couldn't turn back now. Marcus had saved her once. Now, it was her turn to save him. As she approached the market district, Leah slowed her pace, scanning the darkened streets. It was early morning, and the sun was still low in the sky, casting long shadows over the crumbling buildings. The market was quiet, abandoned in the wake of the crackdown. Nero's forces had swept through the area days ago, rooting out suspected resistance members and leaving destruction in their wake. Leah's heart tightened as she thought about Marcus, alone and wounded, waiting for her amid the chaos. She had seen the aftermath of Nero's raids before, bodies left in the streets, homes destroyed, lives shattered. She couldn't let that happen to Marcus. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, Leah answered. I'm almost there. Be careful, Marcus's voice crackled through the line. It's not safe. I know, Leah replied, her voice soft but steady. But neither are you. There was a brief pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice was quieter. I didn't think you'd come. Leah's heart ached at his words, the vulnerability in them. She had always seen Marcus as strong, unshakable, a man who thrived in a world of power and control. But now, as she heard the fear in his voice, Leah realized that he was just as human as the rest of them. I had to, she said. I'm not leaving you behind. Marcus heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching, his body tensing as he gripped the gun. Every instinct screamed at him to run, hide, and escape the open. But he stayed where he was, waiting, hoping that the figure approaching was Leah, and not one of Nero's men. The footsteps grew louder, and then, through the haze of smoke and dust, Marcus saw her. Leah moved quickly, her body hunched low, her eyes sharp as she scanned the area. She wore a dark jacket, and her hair pulled back into a tight knot at the base of her neck. She looked every bit the warrior he had come to know, a woman who had fought for survival her entire life. Relief washed over Marcus as she reached him, her hand gripping his arm as she pulled him into the shadows of a nearby building. "Are you hurt?" Leah asked, her voice low as she scanned him for injuries. "It's just a graze," Marcus replied, though the pain in his side told a different story. "Nothing serious." Leah didn't look convinced, but she didn't push the issue. Instead, she turned her attention to their surroundings, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the empty street. "We need to move. Nero's men are still looking for you." Marcus nodded, though his body protested the idea of running. He had been lucky to survive the ambush but wasn't sure how long his luck would hold. "Where do we go?" he asked, his voice tight with pain. "There's a safe house on the other side of the river," Leah replied, glancing over her shoulder. "We can make it there if we move fast." Marcus didn't argue. He trusted Leah and her instincts, that was all he had right now. He followed her lead as they moved through the streets, their footsteps silent on the cobblestones. The pain in his side flared with every step, but Marcus gritted his teeth and pushed through it. He couldn't afford to slow down, not now. As they made their way toward the river, the streets grew darker, the buildings more dilapidated. This was the part of Rome that most people never saw, the hidden alleys and forgotten corners where the city's secrets were buried. It was a fitting place for the resistance to hide, where no one would think to look. But Marcus knew better than to trust appearances. Nero's men were everywhere, and they had eyes in the shadows. They reached the river just as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Leah led Marcus to a narrow bridge hidden beneath a canopy of trees. The safe house was just beyond, nestled in a small cluster of abandoned buildings on the city's outskirts. "We're almost there," Leah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little farther." Marcus nodded, though his body was screaming in protest. Every muscle ached, and every breath was labored. But he kept pushing forward because he knew stopping now wasn't an option. They crossed the bridge in silence, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness of the early morning. The safe house loomed ahead, its dark windows staring out like empty eyes. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and right now, that was all they needed. Leah pushed open the door, her body tense as she scanned the interior. The room was empty, save for a few pieces of old furniture and a stack of supplies in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was safe. "We'll rest here," Leah said, closing the door behind them. "Just for a little while." Marcus nodded, sinking onto a worn couch in the corner of the room. His body sagged with exhaustion, the adrenaline finally wearing off. He let out a long breath, his eyes closing as the pain in his side dulled to a distant throb. Leah moved to the window, her eyes scanning the street outside. "We'll be safe here for now," she said softly, though Marcus could hear the doubt in her voice. Safe. The word felt hollow, meaningless. In Nero's Rome, there was no such thing as safety, not for them or anyone. But for now, in this moment, they were together. And that was enough. Chapter 8, Faith and Fire. The safe house was quiet, except for the faint crackling of the fire Leah had lit in the old wood-burning stove. The soft glow of the flames cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, giving the small room an eerie, almost dreamlike quality. Marcus Vitali sat on the worn couch in the corner, his eyes closed, his body exhausted from the night's events. Every muscle ached, and the pain in his side was a dull throb that never seemed to fade. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the turmoil in his mind. He had never expected his life to take this turn. Marcus lived in a world of power, control, and influence for years. He had played the game of politics and wealth, bending the world to his will. But now, in the dark and crumbling remains of the safe house, none of that seemed to matter. He was no longer the powerful CEO who could command respect with a glance. He was just a man, wounded, tired, and unsure of what came next. Across the room, Leah Gregorio stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the dark streets outside. She hadn't said much since they had arrived at the safe house. Marcus could sense the tension in her, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She had always been strong and in control, but even someone like Leah had limits. Marcus opened his eyes, watching her in the dim light. She looked so small and fragile at that moment, yet there was something unbreakable about her. He admired her strength and determination, but he also saw the cracks, the fear she tried so hard to hide. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked softly, his voice breaking the heavy silence between them. Leah didn't turn to face him. She kept her eyes on the street, her body rigid, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. "I'm fine," she replied, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her. Marcus frowned, pushing himself up from the couch despite the protest of his aching muscles. He moved toward her, careful not to make too much noise. The floor creaked beneath his feet as he came to stand beside her, his gaze following hers out the window. "What are you looking for?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah shook her head, eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkened streets. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I just have this feeling, like something's coming." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He had felt the same unease ever since the ambush. Nero's men had been one step ahead of them, and now, even in the safety of the safe house, it felt like they were still being watched and hunted. "You should rest," Leah said suddenly, her voice softer now. "You're hurt." "I'll be fine," Marcus replied, though the truth was, he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pushing through the pain. The bullet wound in his side hadn't been severe, but